So I think clearly a good place to start would be for everybody to introduce themselves. If you wouldn't mind, if I could maybe start with you, Frank, if you could just tell everybody your name, the company you work for, the position within that company, but also maybe an idea of what's currently happening in your marketplace. I think for all of us, we had 2 years of COVID disruption. We had a year of probably some of the busiest times, I think, in our industry's history last year, and then big question mark over what's happening in 23 and beyond. So, Frank, if I can throw it to you.
Hi there, Frank Morley is my name. I'm co-owner and MD of a company called Corporate Care. So we're the biggest DSP in Ireland, and more recently in the UK, we've just started activities in the UK market. In relation to what we're seeing this year, I think an interesting year, unlike last year in kind of every respect. I think we've had a good Q1, which is encouraging. Q2, we have a big question mark over. We think Q4 will be good, and Q3, we've no idea. And so you might ask, where am I drawing that from? It's from our connections with the RMCs, it's from our direct clients, it's from our knowledge of what's actually quite a small and readable market. So interesting year ahead, I think.
Great, thank you very much. Fiona?
Hi everybody, good afternoon. Fiona Redford, Supply Chain Director with Cartus, managing the DSPs throughout EMEA and APAC. So yeah, we had a slower start to 2023, obviously in comparison to 2022, but definitely comparable to 2018, 2019. We do anticipate an increase in volume. We have a number of new clients coming on board over the next 3 to 4 months. And the encouraging thing is, as well, is we've got a number of RFPs on the go just now. So hoping, praying that they come to fruition and we can see volume growing as we move into Q4 probably. Same prediction, Frank.
Good, great. Thank you. Raman?
Hi everyone, I'm Raman Narula from Formula Group. I founded the company in 2004 and I'm from India. Lots happening in that part of the world for sure. We are going to be the largest populated country in the world, overtaking China. I don't know I'm proud of that or not, but yeah, that's a fact. But the good part of that is that we are the largest earning population in the world from 18 to 45, and I think that makes us a very strong economy, a place where we are strongly positioned, strongly in the China plus one policy of global companies in the world, the way the things are turning out in the world. So yeah, the future looks bright, of course, but we are a tech-heavy country, and with the recent changes in the tech industry, with all the firing and everything, I think we're all in the same boat, and it's a bright future, but we have to be patient.
Okay.
Thanks, and hello everyone. I'm Jason Parry, I'm with Server. Been with the business 17 years. I look after basically EMEA and Asia Pacific. I have key service lines rolling up into me, including destination services and immigration. Outlook for the year very similar to what Fiona shared, but one thing I'd also add is that last year for us was an extraordinary year, certainly the summer period. So I think what we're focusing on, certainly in my regions for the next few months, is trying to work out what's coming ahead for this summer, trying to understand the trends in specific markets, specifically those high volume markets where we had a squeeze last year, and trying to make sure that we're just advising our client base correctly so we can get through this summer on a smooth level. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Markus Demuth. I'm the founder and owner of Blue Global Relocation in Germany. We are a DSP headquartered in Munich. Well, our last year was very special. I think it's the best word to describe the situation. I think everybody heard about the situation in Berlin, and we received a lot of refugees from the Ukraine, and it had a huge impact on the housing market. The Q1 2023 was the best quarter ever revenue-wise for us, but we can see that the incoming cases are decreasing. So it's going a little bit down, and nobody knows what's coming in Q2, Q3, and in the last quarter.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Daniel Danko. Apologies for the voice. My colleagues made me sing karaoke last night. I am with Alter Global, responsible for EMEA supply chain, and similar to my colleagues to the left here, we are expecting more work and unpredictable revenue for the next few months. But there's also a glimmer of hope on the horizon, hopefully for late Q4 this year or later Q1 next year.
Great, thank you very much. So quite a few question marks over future volume and lots of use of the word unpredictable. How did you get on with budgeting in 23, and is it possible to predict 2024? Would anybody like to have a stab of what's going to happen, looking at your crystal ball? No is the answer to that. It's impossible. It's impossible to say. I think the point is, we've had this conversation as a group, putting a budget together for the next year is becoming more difficult than ever because nobody knows what your sort of annual comparison could be. Do you compare the next year with what we've just experienced in 23? Do you compare 22? When was the last normal year? I think maybe we're going back to 2019 to make that annual comparison. So, yeah, pretty volatile market right now where lots of question marks. So with that in mind, as our market continues to evolve, we are now thankfully in a post-COVID world. How do you continue as an organisation to continue to demonstrate your value and meet the changing expectations of your clients? Daniel, maybe if I could start with you.
Yeah, sure. So from our side, our global consulting services are spending a lot of time with the clients, as well as client services team. It's important to help clients build agility in their programs. I know it's easier said than done. There's a lot of discussions happening, looking at the benefits, looking at the structure of the program. It's not all about the cost savings as such. It's also about deploying the benefits the right direction and also being able to redeploy the funds that are left over to maybe different activities. So we've seen a lot of that happening within the last definitely 3 to 6 months in our space. So staying connected to the clients is critically important. Same goes to obviously connecting with our supply chain. We're definitely ramping up the efforts to have those frequent conversations with the suppliers, the experts on the ground, right? We're doing a lot of benchmarking studies as well around the benefits as such, and trying to figure out cost effectiveness of those programs. Ultimately, what clients are asking us for right now is for us to be consultative, but also analytical, using all the data, all the reports that we have, and coming really prepared to these conversations. They are also very much in unknown space, many of these businesses. Of course, we all know tech sector took it hard on the chin in the last few months. So we're waiting for this to rebound, hopefully in a near future. We're studying patterns of escalations. We're looking at ultimately what is data telling us to be able to come to meaningful conversations with the clients and give them the right advice, what to do with the program. This raises question about value of destination services. There's a lot of conversations around that. So questions about, is the scope fit for purpose in a given locale? This is exactly why we need our destination service partners to come back to us with recommendations. It's very often that we take a long time to actually course correct, and it's important more than ever now to actually be quick and timely. Gather the information from the ground, package it, look at the data in our system, and present it and coach clients on what to do with those programs. So that's one of the things that I'm definitely noticing is happening very actively behind the curtain. Okay. And also, obviously, with extremely unpredictable environment, plan for contingencies if we can. It's difficult, but obviously we've learned from various situations, political instability. Obviously, we have a war going on east from us, earthquakes in Turkey, things like that. All of these acts essentially impact how the service category operates and how it's being managed as well. So we're having discussion internally with the service category owners about what is the best plan for what-if scenarios in the future. So all of these things are kind of all these balls that we're juggling as the RMC currently, all up in the air, and hopefully we're not dropping too many of them.
Right, excellent. Okay, thank you. Fiona, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, well, definitely from a Cartus perspective, it's sitting down with our clients and reviewing their policies. Obviously, we need to make changes to adjust to the needs, the current needs of both the clients and the customers as well. So it's changing the policies to meet that, whether it's, they're more working from home, remote working, etc., or whether it's the change in policy type to meet the different populations that are coming in, or the various family size, singles, just to make sure that obviously everything's been adjusted to suit their needs as well. But it's not just from the Cartas side, it's obviously the extension of Cartas, it's our partners on the ground as well. So working together with our DSPs to make sure that the information is shared with us. I think it's more important even it's shared in a timely fashion. It's not about, personally I think it's too late if you start sharing any trends, etc., or challenges in market with the customer when they come in to the host location. It's getting it to the client in front of that piece as well. It's making sure market challenges shared with the client, they understand it, in order that they can then translate that and make sure their employees are aware of it prior even to being introduced to the DSP as well. In some cases, it's actually even more advantageous to get the DSPs involved with us when we're having these conversations with the clients as well. So as I say, get in front of the time the customer's coming in, get together with Cartas, the DSPs, and the clients as well. We know from a past experience, we've actually had our DSPs go to the clients' offices, having these discussions face to face, which is actually much better than even Teams, whatever, or sharing information with them, because it gives them the opportunity to come back and ask questions as well. So yeah, it's getting ahead of the game and making sure they're aware.
Excellent. Thank you. Marcus, would you like to add a DSP perspective?
Well, as Daniel already said, the client relationship, even if it's a direct customer or an RMC, it's super important. And even they don't know what the future will bring, it's the exchange of information, and it's super important. And well, nobody knows due to the worldwide political scenarios we have, like the Ukrainian war or maybe Taiwan, what will happen. We created a couple of services during COVID, special for the COVID situation, and now we are trying to brainstorm about how maybe AI can help us to develop added value. Even we think that the human factor, and the DSP is a human factor, and that's our value, is most important.
Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, can I just add one or two things maybe?
Sure.
I think actually we're probably in two areas right at the moment. We're in a post-COVID area, and that means that people are moving, which is excellent. And we're also in a post-2022. So I know for us that 2022 was incredibly active, and standards to a certain extent dropped, so we have to get those back up again. So I think we're actually in two different areas. I think also our markets have changed. I know that certainly in Ireland the accommodation kind of market is extremely critical, and that's probably common in within many areas. So it's like getting to know that again, re-establishing contacts, trying to make sure that we're really on top of that local kind of information, because our RMCs and our like directs all really need to understand what the heck is happening out there. And that's really our. And I think also I'd say that our own business kind of development activities need to get back into gear again, because this year will be tougher. So that means we have to go out there and look actively at like new opportunities, which we probably didn't have to do too much of last year. So big changes.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Based on some of your answers, I've just written down a couple of key phrases. I don't know about you, but as I get older, I feel like time speeds up. And I feel like it wasn't that long ago that I was hearing at an RMC conference, the key speaker was saying, you need to follow the scope, you mustn't over-deliver because that takes up too much time, and if there's pressure on pricing, just follow the scope. And now what I'm hearing from a lot of you mentioned coaching clients and reviewing policy, and again, from some of the conversations I've heard at this conference, there's quite a lot of interpretation of a scope of work. It's not possible anymore to, in some cities, pick an assignee up, show them 10 properties, fill out a report, and then pick the 3 that you like, and away you go. It kind of feels like those days are over. So are you seeing the same? Are you seeing it's up to your firstly, your DSP network, that they have to interpret the scope that's being provided based on what's happening and how the market conditions are changing? Again, Daniel, maybe if I could start with you on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to explain, as RMCs, we don't really like to customize the scope in early stages of the engagement. especially when you're bidding for business. It's way too much work. We don't have time to turn around and ask lots of questions about the scope. It's dependent on geographies as well. So essentially what happens when we win business and during the discovery phase of the implementation, this is where those interesting questions come up about the scope. This is a prime opportunity for us to step in. Yet again, depends on the timeline of the implementation. Sometimes you just address the key locations, you go to the key suppliers. It typically happens, especially in a bigger engagement, we're looking at 30, 40, 50 locations. Imagine having to go to 50 suppliers and ask for 50 conversations about the scope, right? Anyway, so I just wanted to set the stage with the scope, how it is. But you're absolutely spot on. What's happening, clients do expect flexibility. I mentioned in the beginning, utilizing that package to the best possible way, right? So we all know about the core and flex options and how the budget should be utilized. And we need to, and are forced to, have conversations with suppliers to maximize that value of the service as such, right? What we've seen as well with some of the bigger clients of ours is that, and this is interesting in my view, because we all know what good looks like on the ground, and many times you have these very clear conversations with suppliers, and they know what needs to happen. They know what changes need to happen in a scope, and yet clients still asks for a 3-month pilot program to quantify and qualify potential price increase, right? So it's not that we're stalling and we're not knowing what to do. We're essentially put in a position also to actually come to the client, again, with some data set showing, yes, we sample this for 3 months on a population of 100 employees, and this is the outcome. Yeah. We do pre-surveys, we do post-surveys, we do checks in between on the quality, right, of the experience, and then we can come and say, yes, Germany is telling us we need an additional day of assistance, for example, or we need to take away portions of the scope. We've seen things go both ways. We've seen things to reduce, and we also have seen clients actually give us authorization to increase the cost of the program.
Okay, I agree. I do find that really interesting because I feel like that is also related to pricing, right? So for us, we'll be asked to provide, for DSPs, we'll be asked to provide pricing on a general scope, and then you're saying that's the pricing that you'll use to win that client. Then through implementation, you'll have a conversation about some of the intricacies and differences of that scope, and it might affect the pricing or might affect exceptions to policy.
That's correct.
Okay.
And it's safe to say nothing is set in stone these days.
Yeah.
So everything's up for discussion, clarification.
Yeah.
And really, it's about the detail. And ultimately, what we need to do is the right thing for the customer on the ground. Yeah. We can't be forcing clients to be using or utilizing packages that are not perceived as a valuable packages.
Yeah. So again, as a DSP, if you are over-delivering or if you're constantly saying you're doing something outside of the general scope, it's up to us to come to you and say, can there be some flexibility here because what's actually written is not possible.
It's the first port of call. Obviously, we are monitoring escalations. Sure. Or, through conversations with suppliers, we get an idea about the market. Yeah. As I mentioned, because our attention is scattered across so many territories, it's so much easier just for DSP to come to us and give us that information and spoon feed us the information, and we can act on that.
Okay, great. Excellent. Again, Fiona, do you want to add to that? Is there something to add?
Yeah, as Daniel said, it's a generic scope globally that we use, and obviously that incorporates both time-based as well as the specific services. But that's where we're also relying on our DSPs to come back. If it's a one-off, it's fine. There's an exception raised on that file. But if they're seeing a trend in having to deliver extra over and above what they're authorised for, then that's something we take back to the client and explain why. As long as you go with a justification, there's never any pushback that you're going to get paid an additional fee for it. Either change the fee on the product or introduce a new product on it as well.
Okay, yes, great. And again, I think that's something we did talk about last year with the panel in terms of DSPs not just going back and saying, I need an extra day, but explaining why and justifying the necessity in a way that you can then present that to your client to say, this is what's actually happening on the ground in the market, and this is the reasons why. Okay, good. I don't know, Jason, do you want to add anything at this point? You're good? Okay. Again, so from a DSP perspective, are you seeing that? Are you able to interpret scope and go to your RMC and say, this is what we are noticing and this is how things need to change? Frank, do you want to comment?
I think most DSPs have always been pretty good at this. I think what we've learned over the years is that you don't just look at a scope of work, you have to apply that to the area.
Yep.
And I know that if I look at Dublin, probably has 80 postal codes, and the situation in every one is just a little bit different. So you can't assume that there's kind of one way of kind of tackling this market. So I think we've been good at that over the years. I think one of the advantages of 2022 being as hectic as it was, that I think our dialogues with the RMCs became more mature, because it was a year where we had to push back on certain things, and we had to explain why that was needed. And I think the RMCs took that well and worked with us. And I think what we're seeing now as we go into this year, that there's actually a greater level of kind of trust and understanding between RMCs and DSPs. And we really should be acting as one anyway, but that wasn't always the case.
Yeah. So. I think that's also a really good point. It's almost out of necessity last year when volume was through the roof. Yes, Jason?
Yes, I would like to point actually. I think a couple of years ago when we talked on the panels, there was a lot of discussion around the emergence of the role of procurement on the client side. All of a sudden, they're in every discussion in the review meetings, and you're almost having a sort of dual review setup where they're just breathing down the necks of mobility. And you can sometimes see the pull from the left to the right, where the scope that you have to go with, you can see mobility sitting there, not necessarily on board with the scope. I think what we've maybe seen of a little bit of a trend, and that seemed to be heavily the case sort of 3-4 years ago, is it feels a little sometimes like mobility have kind of wrested back control, and it does come a little bit down to that local flexibility and working with the local HR teams. And whilst procurement still signs off and has the oversight and challenges, I think there is that little extra now to have those local discussions and make amendments. I would also say it is regional. Talking about EMEA and Asia Pacific, there's certain markets that stand out to me where when you try and, it's very, very challenging to negotiate with certain HR contacts. I can think of a few APAC ones off the top of my head where it's usually a very brief conversation that you end up having. But we do see, I think the more mature clients, the ones that have seen this over years, the ones that are focused on the client experience, they do listen. And you mentioned about spending time with thought leadership, looking at policy. I think those experienced mobility professionals do have that extra level of flexibility, and that helps us as the RMC.
Great, thank you. Daniel, did you want to make a point?
I was going to just touch on pricing in the RFPs, because there may be a perception that, just from a timeline perspective, things, as you know, in the RMC world take a long time. So we sometimes price for the RFP, and then 9 months later, we may win the account or may not win the account. But I wanted to basically make sure it's clear, and I think majority of the RMCs do that, is we try really hard to stay away from fixed pricing in contract, because we just can't have any influence on what's going to happen. Inflation is a good example of that, right? So 95%, I would say, of contracts, we essentially don't put pricing in the contract itself. What we do is obviously, as a stewards of clients' money, have to explain our best approach to manage that pricing.
Okay.
So it's always possible to have these pricing conversations afterwards. There may be a perception that once you put your price in, that it's fixed for life of the contract, but that's probably not true in many cases.
Right. Okay. And Raman, I think you had a point on scope of work.
Since you mentioned APAC, Jason, I think a lot has been happening there correctly. And I think as a case study, I think one of the biggest things which is happening in APAC is, and when I come here, I remember the last year I was meeting a lot of DSPs, a lot of RMCs, but today, this time I think we all know that we're all meeting a lot of corporate housing firms here. So I think one of the biggest changes is I think going back to the first question, I think the changing expectation of the clients is coming from the changing need of the client. And I think one of the biggest changing need has been short-term assignments rather than very long-term assignments. And hence there has been a great demand for corporate housing. And that's what we've seen flourish over the last 1.5, 2 years. So I think that's one of the biggest changes. I think the other biggest change is a lot of localization or domestic recruitment is happening in the market. And which means that you have intra-country moves happening, in APAC, in India especially. And I think that's where the adaptation, going back to the first point, is required. I think this message is more for the DSPs, since I'm a DSP. Is I think that's where the adaptation is required. You have to reflect and introspect on the kind of talent you have. Will the same consultant be able to cater to a short-term accommodation or domestic move or not? Do you need to kind of upgrade that skill? Do you have a broker network of being able to come down to those budgets, because maybe you're working in a different budget level and you're coming down to a different budget level? So I think that's where you need to adapt. You need to work internally. You need to work externally to be able to meet and therefore then have a progressive dialogue with your RMC partners as to the kind of changes which are happening, in the market, and how you're preparing for it and how you can cater to the changing needs of the clients. I think everybody's very used to, everybody's heard of the fact that our biggest enemy is actually the lump sum model, where, I'll give you an example where we were onboarded by a very big MNC, and we were told that you have 350 moves coming your way. And, 6 months passed and we only had 50 moves coming in. And I said, we had a call with them and we said, what happened? They said, everybody's cashing out. So nothing's coming your way and our way. And fortunately, our RMC partners were true partners, and we kind of got on a dialogue. And I think we all need to think out of the box for that. And how do we sustain our revenues there? And when we were talking about scope of work, so we came up with a solution that let's move away from the traditional scope of work we've given them to a more a la carte menu kind of a scope of work. So even though the assignee has cashed out a bit and is already initiated his move, the biggest problem the assignee has is that he doesn't know what he needs. So, and that's the worst place for him to be, because as a result, he ends up moving to another location and then realizes, he needs a settling in, or he might need a support on a lease registration, or he might need support on his kid's school search, or so on. And hence, by creating a la carte menu where the assignee could see that, we could still engage a lot more assignees who came back and said, okay, I haven't used the home search because I managed to find that online, but I need your lease registration support because I need help. I don't want my security deposit to be stuck later when I exit the lease, and so on. And hence, we managed to engage the assignee. There was a fee involved there. We managed to sustain revenues, and everybody is a winner. That program is still going on. So I think that's the change required, and that's where we need to introspect. That's where we need to have dialogues and bring that knowledge as DSPs to our RMC partners so that they can engage with their customers and continue to drive value and sustain our revenues. So, I think that's what I see.
Thank you.
Alistair, if I could just add, just when you were mentioning about the budget, because we heard it in the DSP panel yesterday, there's these housing challenges globally.
Yep.
So we're encouraging our clients as well, make sure they're reaching out to their data analyst companies, they're getting an up-to-date report back, because we're finding in a lot of occasions, the budgets they're not realistic.
Yeah, right.
So again, we want to make sure that that's addressed prior to, the customer being sent in.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think, Robin, as you were talking, I saw a lot of nodding heads around the room. I think lots of people can relate.
DSP to another DSP.
Okay, I'm going to change tack slightly so we can get through a couple of other topics. Something we talk about a lot, and I feel like we make quite slow progress, is technology. We talk about technology a lot and how it can influence service delivery. I feel like most DSPs are still wondering it feels like almost a bit of a gamble. Which horse do we back? Which one of the off-the-shelf products out there is the one to go for in terms of a relationship with an RMC client? So if I can maybe start with the three of you, the RMC members of the panel, what's the latest advice, without naming names, you would give to your DSP network in terms of technology?
Okay, maybe start with that one. I think you're right. I think the question we often get, we talk about the importance of technology, and the question that I've often heard is people to say, can you tell us what you actually want? Like, RMCs often tell us to stand down because you have your ecosystem, so you're not using our technology. So why are we going to invest in technology when we're not using it when we work with you? but then you talk about the importance of it. And I think that there's not a single answer. And I think if I'm talking to someone with a small, one city DS versus someone that has 27 locations and is running an organisation that has multiple service lines, there is a different answer. I think one thing that's really important is just to look at what else is out there. There are tech disruptors out there. There's people that are DSPs that have added tech, and there's tech companies that have kind of almost added the DSP at the other end. It's important to know the products that are taking place, but I also think it's important to just think of the basic function for the customer. So if we're talking about housing, they'd like to see the profiles in the app. If they're doing a housing tour, seeing the itinerary in the app, and if there's documentations and check-ins, having that in an app, they're kind of basics. It's the same with immigration. If you're uploading documents onto a timeline where you can see traffic light systems and in Gantt charts, this is all about what the customer hopes to have. That's talking about customer experience. But the other point that I would add is there's, I think, a big focus for RMCs around connecting with our partners. And we have the kind of range of people that are still almost pen, paper, Excel spreadsheets, but an amazing DSP, right up to those that have developed highly customized systems. And really our focus is often API. How can we connect? We have the ecosystem, we need the flow of data to come in. And one thing I would say, and again, without naming names, there are organizations that I've seen over recent years that offer the off-the-shelf customizable systems, but their focus actually is connecting with an RMC made easy. And that for us is attractive. If we can bring 60 DSPs under a banner, API'd, connected, versus going out to 60 individual DSPs and then have to have those products, sort out the fields, because of course you're trying to match fields and linking the flow of information. So for us, I think that critical mass of being under one of these groups is attractive. And I'm pretty sure I can speak for other colleagues, other RMCs, that we do have those discussions with those exact tech companies on kind of, okay, who do you have? And often if there's someone that is joining one that we have an API with that's high volume, great, that's another 2% of our volume connected. So I think understanding who has APIs of RMC is now an important part of the purchase decision. But again, that really focuses on the flow of key milestones and information through to the ecosystem. And I think we should not forget that, going back to my earlier point, the customer journey and what the actual customer sees as it relates to tech is just as important, because tech clients often take the API as something that, that has to happen. It's the customer piece that they want to see through the eyes of the customer. And that's often where we get challenged of, what are you showing them? What does it look like? Can we have a demo? And that's, I think, it's getting the balance of those two pieces right.
So just on that point then, so obviously not now in front of everybody, you say you don't want to name names, but if you were having a one-to-one conversation with one of your DS partners and they said to you, what technology should I be investing in? Would you name names individually?
So what I wouldn't do is drive to a single group.
Okay.
We don't have any contracts or driving to single groups. However, we do have APIs with certain groups, and I would probably name a couple of those names where we do have APIs in place. They're systems that can be customized off the shelf. But we also do have APIs direct with individuals that have high volume for us. So I don't want to sort of shy away from those that have really invested in a customized system, that have 27 markets, that have huge volume. And even in one market, people that have done that, it's really respectable. And they are typically partners that have it locked down on the ESG and diversity areas. So we don't want to shy away from that, the entrepreneurial solution either. And if that means API indirectly, then so be it. But I think it's just important to note that APIing with an RMC may have anything from 200 to 400 DSP partners, individual partners. So those as individual projects, even if you allow 4 to 6 weeks per project, you're a decade out there.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Fiona, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, like Jason said, we wouldn't be recommending one.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're not the same as surveyors. We don't have an API at the moment in place. But certainly what we would be recommending is, no matter what, they should be looking for what's going to create efficiencies for the DSP internally. But certainly from the customer perspective, it's simplification and how it's going to improve the customer experience. So as long as it's ticking these boxes, security is obviously very high on our list as well. That's the first thing our clients will say to us.
Yep.
Because it's yet another technology app that the customer has to feed into or apply to. So they're looking to make sure that it's secure to go in and do that as well. But just from a technology standpoint, Cartas is at the moment more focused on the technology to suit our clients' needs at the moment.
Yeah,
So
okay.
API obviously in place for that.
Yep.
And of course, that's to encourage, obviously, keep the current clients and obviously to attract new prospects as well. But API is still there. We're still looking at
Okay,
it.
good.
More to come.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll talk about it this time next year.
Can I comment?
Jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that terrifies us as a DSP, it's probably this whole area.
Okay.
And I don't use the word terrified lightly.
Okay.
For a few reasons. One, I think like many DSPs, we have good tools and we use them to good effect. We feel that the RMCs, I'm sorry to say, are interested in what we're using, but don't really want to get too involved. And I think that has some kind of drawbacks. I think one of the drawbacks is that I think technology is, I mean, if we look around us, in everything we do, every activity, everything we do, it's deeply embedded, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it's not as deeply embedded here yet as it possibly could or should be. And I might be completely wrong here, but I think when and if accommodation markets ease a little bit, that's when we'll see these tech guys really storming in and causing us. And we're a kind of a little bit of a cozy cartel up here, you know, DSPs and RMCs. It's kind of a nice relationship, you know. You do okay, we do okay, and I think that could be rattled to its core, you know.
Yep.
And that terrifies me because I don't know what that will look like. I don't know when it'll happen, and I don't know what it might do to us. But I think we have some time now to get our heads around this. And when I say time, it's maybe this year or next year, and not a whole lot more, maybe, you know. But we need to somehow get our act together. And I think, like, you know, this is the 6th Euro that I've been at. I remember we talked about APIs 6 years ago.
Yep.
And we still don't have one with anybody. And I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming RMCs. I'm saying we. It's a collective we. I think apart from APIs, here's what not having APIs means. It means double or triple entry of data into all kinds of like places, and that has a security risk. It means that we're kind of missing out on efficiencies, which in turn means we're missing out on abilities to kind of save costs. And it just rolls on, you know. So I think we're in a critical area right now of having a little time left to get this right, but only a little time. And I might be completely wrong. That's just why it terrifies me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, the objective of today's session wasn't to terrify everybody in the audience, or to think, maybe I'm in the wrong industry. So yeah, but I agree. I think we talk about it a lot, but we all kind of collectively need to get our act together. Daniel, do you want to jump in?
Just a quick comment. I agree with Frank. We're not capitalizing maybe on having those meaningful discussions with you guys because you spend a lot of time in an administration area plugging the information in, right? But to Fiona's point, and that was important what she mentioned, we do have to prioritize as well. We can't be everywhere. And of course, working with the suppliers is critical. For Cartas, it can be critically important to have this mainframe for the clients and that experience, right? On our side, we're looking at the customer experience. So we obviously we're being compared to the consumer market where, you know, the apps are so cool looking and fantastic. And then the relocation is always lacking, you know, 10, 15 years in how applications look like. It's getting better, certainly, right? So I think it's a matter of prioritizing as well. You can't be focused on the customer, on the client experience, on the supply chain at the same time. And I think we just need to figure out this balance, where to add time and energy. Sometimes we have to take away from some projects. It is really just that balance.
Alistair, if I may add.
Yes, you may.
In my experience, I think, you know, we've had tech, as you said, for 9 years, and no API yet, which is fine. But I think for DSPs, I think and we've done a lot of presentations where we've always had to demonstrate the tech we've had. And I think that the real thing which RMCs want to see, in my opinion, and I think that's where we've kind of connected well, is I think that technology for DSP is very important for RMCs to understand that how they have mapped their processes on a technology platform. how are they able to bring consistency in their control quality in their back end in delivery of services. I think for us DSP, firstly, that's very important. And I think that's where technology is very important, because that will help us automate our back end. It will help us be consistent. It will help us demonstrate to our partners, to our direct clients or RMCs here, that this is how we operate our business, and this is how we can assure quality, consistency in delivery of quality of services on the ground. So I think that, firstly, that's where technology is very, very important, I think. I think moving forward to customer-facing technology, and I think that's where we've got a mobile app, we've got the works, but I think that's where there is a certain challenge, and which is no fault of anybody, because I think there is in today's world there's a lot of data privacy, there's a lot of questions regarding people's privacies and so on, and your documentation being stored and not being stolen, and as a result, none of the customer-facing technology is actually used by any of the RMC's clients, assignees on the ground, which belongs to DSPs, right? And I think that's where we need to kind of bridge the gap and see that whether the APIs happen in the near future and we're able to add further value to using technology to a service delivery. So yeah, the back end is very critical, guys, and I think that's where technology needs to be used. Marcus?
Well, I absolutely agree with Frank and with Raman. We are ready for APIs for many, many years. And we invested a lot of money last year for a second technology we are using now as a customer interface. Well, it would just simply avoid a lot of work on our side. We always have to copy the RMC in. We have to provide Excel spreadsheets, hundreds of lines. We have bi-weekly calls with some RMCs. And, well, this could be all gone if we just have an API.
Yeah.
And we are talking about not only since 6 years about it, we're talking for ages about it.
You're right. I think though, we have to be careful that it doesn't become an RMC versus DSP kind of a thing, because it's actually not that. I think it's an us thing. And I often try to look for kind of parallels, and they're kind of hard to find, really. I think if you look at I don't often look at it, but I'm aware of how kind of travel agencies work.
Yeah.
So travel agencies can compete, and they pretty much all use the same operating tool, piece of software, and yet they seem to compete quite nicely. I think it behoves all of us to get together and figure out what the heck does this look like. Like, what are the key components of technology going to be, and how are we going to utilize them to kind of together? And let's be brutal about it. Keep out these companies who are trying to get into our turf, because they'll keep knocking, and they will have, one or two of them will eventually break through. It happens it happens everywhere. So I think that's where we have to be careful that it's an us thing, as opposed to a.
I really like the sound of that.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not sure. I don't know. Does anybody think that's realistic? Does anyone think we'd be able to come together and put competitive advantage to one side and differences aside and say we need an industry-wide API? Do you think that would happen?
I think it's possible, and I think the reason that it will be possible is that if you look at the RMCs and the size that we have significant overlap of partners. If we were to look at this room, for instance, and see who signed up to the RMCs on the panel, there would be significant overlap.
Yeah.
So in a way, an API, I know you have to still connect with a specific business, but really everyone in the room in some way needs to connect with 3 businesses. So I know it's been talked about for a very long time, and it's the kind of topic that gets a bit boring. The client assumes that it's done.
Right.
And that's the danger, is that we're behind. But I do feel, again, with developments, I certainly feel that the traction is moving, and certainly from our business, we've seen numbers motoring. And like I say, there's critical mass. Certain groups, it helps us. And I think, it's not just about those groups, because there's only a handful. But I do feel that over time, I do believe in a couple of years that we will be able to get there. But it will be, your question was more around sitting around the table. I think, we do have RMC sessions once in the year of Euro. It's something that we should probably spend a bit more time together talking about, sharing knowledge, because it helps everyone, like you say.
Okay, good. Great. Anybody want to add anything? Daniel, did you have your hand up?
Maybe just encourage anyone who hasn't embarked on a journey of mapping out kind of a assignee's journey through technology, through the lens of technology, to definitely do that. It's been out there for many, many years now, but it's the speed of change that we're seeing, obviously, it's becoming an inevitable tool. And it's really interesting to also see, and I've had some conversations with suppliers, even during the RIA conference yesterday, where the automation of individual pieces of the scope and how they're able to actually use the pieces of technology to apply it to the scope, and cost savings and time savings, it's invaluable. So definitely, for those who haven't done this mapping of the journey through the customer's eyes, please do so.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Alistair, just to add, when we were saying about we don't want to frighten people, we're talking about technology here. Not everybody wants to use technology.
True,
Not
yes.
every customer on the ground will want to
Yep.
go onto your apps and do whatever. So
Yep.
it's not a case of everybody has to have it
Yep.
in place.
Okay, good.
Because we'll never get away from, that
Absolutely.
face-to-face
Yes.
hand-holding
Essentially, we're
as
a
well.
human touch industry, and I think that's the
Yeah,
beauty of it. Because at the end of the day, the customers want to have somebody on the end of the line and somebody to meet them and take them through their relocation journey and give them a great experience. So,
Yeah.
that will always be there, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. We're going to change tack again now to a different subject. I'm sure there's lots of you in the room who have an amazing relationship with multiple RMCs, and it's a great source of revenue. There's probably a few people in here as well who would love to work with RMCs, see it as a real opportunity for growth. And then there are probably some who are client-directed, who have been chosen by the multinational corporation and are working with an RMC through somebody else's choice. So I thought we'd just talk for a moment about those companies, about the client-directed providers, and what, starting again with the 3 RMC representatives, what you see as the advantages and disadvantages of that relationship you have.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll take that one first.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of a topic that's quite dear to my heart, as I've been in my role for quite some time. So I've kind of seen many, many examples of a client-directed setup starting and how it ended and how it went. And the first thing I would say as an RMC, we put our partners through a lot for the RFPs. And there's no better discussion than being able to tell one, we've just won this huge client in your location, headquartered, and they get this great name, and it just sort of vindicates everything we've done. It's a lovely discussion. But you can't forget that there's someone else in that market who's had that client for a very long time that has lost the work, or have they? Because there's relationships. And so it's never quite as straightforward as that, and I'm always very cautious. And honestly, I've seen instances where I've seen the client-directed suppliers, and I thought, oh, that's going to work perfectly. And I've also had instances where my heart sunk a little bit, and I thought, oh, that's going to be interesting. I'll be honest, looking back, some of those setups are the ones that work best today.
Right.
And I think what happens for me at the start is that there's a little bit of, not a lack of trust on both sides, but if you don't know each other, the individual DS could feel along the lines of, look, we've had this client for 15 years, they don't know us, they're going to try and get us out at the first opportunity, so we have to try and keep a flow of communication through. And that's an immediate defensive position. And it might be from the RMC that it makes sense to have our partner. So you start off almost like at 9 or 10 paces, looking at each other. But one thing I would say, and this is really important, I think, especially when it's a client headquarter location where the major volume goes in, if we get that wrong on any level, then we both suffer. The RMC likely will lose a contract. The DSP, I think they go a little harder on the RMC. It's sometimes like, it's up to you to make that relationship work. There's our partner, go and build bridges. But I do think it's something that I've seen a bit of a shift here, and I think before, I think it was a little bit more of a frosty reception at the start.
Yeah.
But I do feel here, if you can take that opportunity as a DSP to say, okay, we can show you what we do here. I've seen it where I've just been blown away by the service, and we just end up throwing work at that group, and now they're like the number one in that. And they maybe don't write the best RFP and have not quite made it in through the front door, through the selection, but their service is untouchable, and they've got a track record. So I would just say, and I know I would say this as an RMC, but just starting positively, focusing on the knowledge that you have, focus on training on how that client expects services and the stakeholders and what the local HR expect, helps us get off on the right foot. And I think that as I say, there's so many examples for me today where client-directed isn't a dirty word. They're directed for a reason. They're good at what they do. And do you know what? If they're successful in that market, it will pretty much prop up our SLAs and our scores and our maybe financial penalties because of that one group. They can save the day because of the amount of percentage of the volume going into that market. So I think it's important from an RMC standpoint. Yes, it's not ideal. Yes, we'd love to give the work to our network. But the most important thing is the multi-million-pound contract that sits behind it and the longevity there.
Great. Thank you. Daniel, did you have your hand up then?
Maybe just a kind of different angle, different element of client-directed suppliers would be commercially, when you think about it, when we price the engagements, we incorporate referral revenues into our price structure to win the account. So many times client-directed suppliers either come with a specific pricing, at which point almost instantly RMC is losing a portion of the revenue, right? So I'm seeing in our world, we are making that stance and are defending our supply chain as well. Many times, it's my experience where it's mostly anecdotal feedback. I've been working with this supplier for 15 years on the ground. We're very happy with them. But we are pushing and we are actually promoting our supply chain, our partners, with the data and performance management behind it as well. So there's two elements, right? We have some data to show to the clients that we are bringing in a reputable professional company. But there's a second element of it also, and that's the potentially losing revenue stream, which leads to pretty uncomfortable discussions with the client and reopening that Pandora box of the fees on a commercial scale.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I can just add, obviously, we're selling our network first
Yep.
to any new prospects, clients, etc. But because obviously we invest so much time and effort into, the onboarding, the due diligence at the beginning, and the ongoing management of them as well. But where it makes sense, to Jason's point, where it makes sense, and we know that the client-directed supplier has been delivering excellent service to a particular client, and they're wanting to keep them on, then we're more than happy to be flexible and make sure we're working with them. But the good thing about being client-directed as well and already have that connection with the RMC, if we're ever looking for a new supplier in that market, that's the first place we go to.
Okay.
Client-directed and Euro members as well.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, okay, great. Frank, do you want to add to that? Have you been client-directed in the past?
Haven't a whole lot to add to that. I think client selection here isn't client-directed selection here isn't a huge thing.
Okay.
What's a little bit linked, I think, and I just mentioned it briefly, is where an RMC customer goes back to the RMC and says, we're unhappy with our current DSP, can you make a change? So it's different but the same.
Yep.
And that we've picked up nice opportunities there, I think.
Okay.
So just to mention that.
Yes.
I think I can add to that because I think you said it really well that a client-directed DSP or a service provider can be is a great performer. So I don't know how many DSPs are client-directed, and so we are client-directed ourselves from a couple of big organizations for a particular RMC. But it's not necessarily. I mean, we are not yet part of the main supply chain of that RMC, for example. For that, so I think I'm changing that perspective for the RMCs. Is that if I'm the manager and I have to choose a team of great players, I would love to choose players which are in form and which are going and doing the goals right now, rather than taking presentation from the players and seeing, So I think that's a great opportunity for you to see those players who are in form, who are performing, and who are working with your clients since quite a few years. And you said it very well, actually, so those are the ones you would actually go to and look at them, and you would want to expand your supply network. So I think that's so for DSPs who are client directed, I think that's a great way to keep performing. And if you don't have a relationship with the RMC, I think that's a good way forward for that.
Great.
So.
Thank you. Marcus?
Well, we see it as a huge chance.
Okay.
If you're a CD partner, there's a big chance that you can prove your quality, you can prove your experience, that you become a full member. And we made very good experiences. So we became, in 2 cases, a full member. It's very good. We had 1 case, we feel like an unavoidable evil, and we're completely isolated to the whole system.
Yep.
But it was a partnership over 4 years, and it was quite successful.
Excellent.
Still.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so we have a clock just here that's counting down how much time we have left. It feels like it's going really quickly. It feels like time is speeding up, but again, maybe that's just because I'm old. So what I'd like to do is leave 20 minutes for Q&A and see how that goes, see how many questions we have. So 10 minutes on some kind of quick fire questions, if that's okay. So relatively briefly, may I ask you what you're seeing right now are your client, I know this is maybe sector specific, but what are your clients' priorities right now? What you say is most important to some of your clients? Fiona, maybe you want to start.
Still, and I think always will be, employee experience,
Okay.
making sure that you're meeting the needs of that employer. And it's not about, we look at the culture of a client and that's how we want to deliver the service.
Yep.
But we need to be looking at individually as well. Each customer as a separate entity, you're looking to meet their needs, not the client's needs as well. So to make sure that person feels special. The other one is compliance.
Okay.
Still come back. That came back in a recent survey from clients as well. So making sure that we're moving that assignee into the host location compliantly, making sure whether it's bank account, local registration, et cetera, making sure that's set up.
Yep.
We actually have one client who that's their focus, and they only give 10 hours to a DSP to make sure that you're moving that assignee in compliantly. No home search, no settling in, no niceties.
Right.
It's all about getting the compliance piece done.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Okay, thanks. Jason, your clients?
The one that I would probably mention is that whilst we see clients maybe across the bulk of their population looking at sort of lower cost solutions and that kind of thing, the one thing that never goes away is their focus on the VIP population. It is just make or break. You get some of those wrong and things are at risk. So I would just say for us, understanding that it's a VIP, having those solutions, finding solutions around more sort of concierge type service. It's the things that the smaller DSPs are often amazing at and have that ability to set that up. That for me continues to be something that is just high on the agenda of the clients, regardless of their push against the other 95% of their population. That piece still really matters.
Yeah, okay. Daniel, anything to add there?
Yeah, definitely flexibility, but also, well, cost is very important, as I mentioned earlier, in a way where they're looking us to flex in the scope and redeploy those funds to various other pieces that should be utilized, or some of them that are not being utilized, they're essentially just asking to remove from the equation. So we need to be more nimble, which essentially means we are asking our supply chain to be nimble.
Yeah.
So definitely flexibility. Duty of care, as you can appreciate, we're in a world of turmoil these days, and we can really forget that there's somebody out there full of emotions, whole range, excitement, or maybe sheer panic.
Yeah.
And we have their hands, life in our hands, right?
Yeah.
So duty of care and being able to interpret and put all these puzzle pieces together for them remains critical.
Yeah. Okay, just to follow up on that then. So we have cost, obviously, duty of care, VIPs, employee experience, compliance. How high on the list is sustainability? Maybe it's not on the list, I don't know.
Right.
Is that a conversation you're having with your clients? Or?
We've been talking about it for quite a few years now. In all reality, we are seeing it's a step in the right direction from the corporates, but it's definitely not being high on the agenda these days.
Okay.
And I'm only saying this from number of RFPs we responded to, conversations with the multiple clients over the course of the last 6 to 9 months. It's becoming more important, but it has not made the top 5 list yet.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry,
Not at the customer level, but definitely any client calls we're on, or prospects especially.
Right.
That's one of the
Yeah.
top 5
Yeah.
questions that we
Okay.
definitely ask.
If I can add, I think there's sometimes there's an expectation from the client.
Right.
They have priorities that they're focusing in on. I think with sustainability, they're expecting to get the reporting through, the numbers through. They have their corporate goals. We're fully aware of those goals. And
Yeah.
it's just a case of having to get those numbers to align. So it's not so much when you have the reviews, it's not talked about on that level. At RFP stage, 100%
Right.
they will put you through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then those priorities that I've just mentioned, are you seeing that reflected in the conversations that you're having as a DSP with your RMC clients? Is that what's coming up? Not just cost?
Yeah, I think it's increasingly there.
Okay.
I think there's an increasing expectation that we'll have environmental credentials, be it ISO 14001 or EcoVadis, or
Yep.
something
Yep.
that objectively measures
Yep.
our attitude to this. Yeah, so yes,
Okay.
the answer.
Okay, good. Anyone else to add? Okay, so I think we might open it up to questions. I can't see a great deal. I can see a hand. To the microphone there.
There's only 2 of us in the room, so if you could raise your hand if you have something, it saves us a little bit of time.
Yes, hello. Martina Meinhold, Management Mobility Consulting France. You have been talking a lot about technology, a lot about APIs. I have a question concerning trends and technology, not API, but without the P in the middle. Nothing to do, but AI, so artificial intelligence, one of the biggest revolutions actually we are currently facing. What is your opinion how AI will change our industry, relocation industry? So perhaps some of you are already working on new services or on new service models.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. Who'd like to talk about AI?
Just thank you for the question. I can't see your face. No, that's fine. We're certainly not ignoring it. It's a big elephant in the room, I suppose, and maybe it's a bit scary for some companies. On our side, as the Alter Global, we are actually using in a beta testing several streams of AI already for like a productivity tool. So a good example would be, we produce a lot of content as a company, for example, which means you have to have writers to write it down, and then probably another team that looks after social media campaigns. So AI tools these days, ready to go, off the shelf, can actually streamline the content. You write an article that is 2 or 3 or 5 pages long, and that can be basically done by AI in about 15 seconds into the blog. So we're utilizing these sort of things already. So what I'm seeing currently is definitely more on a productivity tool area, and the gaining effectiveness there. So as a complement to what we do currently.
Yeah, I think many of us are actually probably using it and maybe not quite realizing it, that our kind of finance colleagues are using AI tools for different types of analysis that they're doing. Do I think a big machine driven by AI is going to come in and take over from us any day soon? Probably not. No, I think that's something we need to be aware of. And I know that Elon Musk has some really good podcasts on his vision for AI, and they're a little bit scary, But I think it's probably going to be, as Daniel said, a tool that will help us rather than threaten us in the near to medium term.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope that I will not replace our core service, our human or taking the hand, but we are using AI for training videos, for content.
Yeah.
And it's super easy and super efficient, and we're producing videos for 1 minute videos in 15 minutes with AI. It's amazing.
Okay.
I think I highly recommend everybody downloads ChatGPT app.
Yeah, there's a waiting
Test
list.
it out. It'll answer all the questions.
And if I could just add, I think when we talk about APIs, talking about it for 8 years, and it's hard, it's been very slow moving. That will not be the case with AI. We won't be here in 8 years' time saying what we're talking about. It's the pace is completely different.
Yeah.
And similarly, we have certain tools that we're using it for that's developing. I think for an RMC, working with a client, there's just so many tools. I guess the question is, how can, between the RMCs and the DSPs, what can the role of AI be? And I don't have the answer for that one today, but I think it is an area that does need focus and quick.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Okay, thank you. Have another question?
Hello. Staying with the topic of technology, for everyone up there, I guess the big question is when we get into technology, a lot of times we spend time talking about technology as a way to reduce cost or lower cost. Do you really feel like that could potentially be a mistake? Because we know tech is not cheap. All of us are spending a lot of time on technology, a lot of money on technology, but I think the question I really have is that the way we want to sell that part of our service as a cost reduction? Because I haven't yet seen a dramatic cost reduction to our industry with the amount of money we're spending on technology.
Yeah, does anybody want to jump in that, Jason?
Yeah, I could maybe attempt to answer this. I think we've seen instances where people have gone really heavy on the tech with no people, and then they very quickly had to pivot and bring in the supply chain and people in the past. And whether it's at RMC level or DSP level, that has happened on many occasions. So I think you're right. I think the assumption that you introduce a few new features and let's have your costs down 50%, because it doesn't work in practice. I think it has to be in addition, but it's a really delicate balance. I think there have to be driven efficiencies, and I think it was mentioned earlier, the big one is this double duplicate data entry. You have people that are filling in a system, likely not filling in a second one. That one is a genuine saving of time. But I think you're right. I think there are other areas where it's really an enhancement of the journey, but it's not necessarily an efficiency. It's an investment that's cost you money in the first place. It's just, and it makes you more attractive. And so, investing in 5 of those and then expecting a reduction in cost doesn't make sense. So it's about, I guess, the specific scenario.
But yeah, I think it's that. I doubt anybody here has implemented technology just to get costs down. It's about efficiency. It's about experience. It's about all of that. But it is coming at us, and I think we would be foolish, I think, not to understand as much about it as we possibly can, and to understand how it's going to impact. Not necessarily just in a way of bringing costs down, but how it's going to impact our existence. That's really what's key. So I think, it's like, as we talked earlier about it, it's everywhere. It's here too. We have to embrace it, but more for efficiency and experience than any other reason.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone like to add anything? Another question? Is there another question?
Hi, I have a question about the 6-year-long API discussion. It's kind of a two-part question, but out of curiosity, from the DSP perspective or the provider perspective, what realistically, just be transparent for the RMC to us, what are the upfront costs for those of you who successfully connected through API? Were there any costs associated with that for the DSP or for the provider, or resources or manpower needed? That's part one. And then part two is, now that you're end of this successful API connectivity with the provider, what are you doing with that data feed? What are you doing with the data? Are you using it to benefit the customer, the client, or for internal efficiencies like we've been talking about?
Okay.
Can I jump in?
Sure, yeah. Can we get a microphone to Kay? Thanks.
Hi, I'm mindful that sitting on the panel as DSP is not any misservice to you, but you don't have an API right now. And I'm going to say my hands are up and both hands up of having an API and being absolutely vested in that initiative. And yes, we had a conversation, perhaps it's 6 years, perhaps it's 10. In my case, I've been with our organization 15 years. This was a conversation about the number one complaint from a transferee or an RMC is, why do I have to tell you if I've told you and you told that?
Yep.
And what could we do to make a difference? Without doubt, I will never go back. If my shareholders said my technology was going to change and there was no API, I would quit the company. That's how vested. And not because we're a large organization that have multiple footprints. When I look at time is not a renewable energy. It is not a renewable resource. The moment that we want our consultants delivering the services, we want them to be delivering in a value proposition that will be of value to you as the RMC, to the client, and to the transferee. Having somebody key something in that somebody else has already keyed in, and it's not just a verification of the data, that is a waste of a human being's moment. So having an API, and I would say, yes, there is a cost. Yes, there is a resource. Our organization, and I know there's a few other organizations in this room who have taken that initiative, and I could say a great leap forward. Others have followed on that coattail. It did take time. It was not an easy process. It was not overnight. That has a cost in time and money and resources. I'm also very lucky to have a tech company that supports us, that is independent to us, that has chosen to help and support, and actually looks to support the ecosystem overall. Because the sustainability of our business, yes, it is a human touch, but I would never want to see technology turned off in what we're doing. We could not exist.
Okay.
Right? So I think it is important.
And Kay, do you want to give Diana and maybe a few others any indication of time and cost?
15 years. A lifetime of, energy and cost.
A
Actually,
lifetime of energy.
Patience. It's
Context, but I actually want it from the RMC perspective. I'd like to hear Jason say, like, yeah, we successfully we've been hearing about it, we're ready. We're ready for it. We want it to happen. I'd like to know, like, from the RMC perspective, like, yeah, we successfully did this with people because we've been waiting and waiting. Like, pick us, we're next. Can we do it? API.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm just curious, like, did you do one successfully, and what are you doing with that?
So
What's
yes,
the
we
biggest
have.
benefit to you right now?
Yeah, so the way it's worked is this. The first one is always really painful and takes way longer than you planned, and the time frames go flying out the window. After that, it's locked down. And I spoke to a partner earlier, and it went live a few months ago, and I kind of today was waiting for this is a bit clunky, or that hasn't worked, and it's like, it's amazing. So it's like, that's different to the very first one we rolled out was with single business. And I think with that one, when it went live, it was a bit clunky. So it does take time. I think to answer your question, if it's an individual company, there's quite a time investment and a cost investment on both sides. It does cost, it does take time. And the danger from the RMC world is we have releases for clients that are queued up, and it's all about the client-facing tech. So sometimes that you have to look at the numbers game. However, and again, I don't want to keep talking about groups that have connection across many businesses, but for us that is attractive. Like I say, we can bring 50 or 60 in, that is attractive. What I don't have an answer for is the sort of in-between at the moment. If those platforms aren't for you, is there another way? But I guess the feeling I have is that right now, there are solutions coming where there were not solutions 3 or 4 years ago, and that for me is the difference.
Okay, great. That sounds like progress.
Yes.
Slow progress, but progress nevertheless.
I have a point to add to that.
Okay, great.
I think the key thing is, the key pitch line for us, to our customers with all the AI, without the API, without the the AI, and everything coming in, is that we all need to be a AI-enabled relocation company. And I think that's very, very important that, as you said correctly, that, our consultants will always be there, but are they AI-enabled? Are they able to use AI to improvise service delivery, access information in a jiffy, in a few seconds, and be able to present it to your assignees on the ground so that improves the entire experience. So I think being an AI-enabled company, to use technology to your benefit, for the industry's benefit actually, to be able to, each one of us should be able to say that we are an AI-enabled service provider is going to be the key, and I think everybody needs to, again, go back, because we are all in different markets, our customer needs are different, and how do we use that technology and AI to our benefit, to make our backends, to make our consultants, to make everything we do enabled, so that there's efficiency visible to the client and in the experience while delivering on the ground. So yeah, that's...
Thank you. Do we have another question? We have one at the back as well.
Hi. First, thank you for a great discussion. I'd like to go back. Earlier today, we talked during the Guardians of the Galaxy session about ecosystems. So I'd like to turn to Alistair, who you had mentioned about perhaps leveraging your WERC and coming up with some standard APIs, because everyone's talking about where they are in the journey. Perhaps by having kind of a common tent, we can learn from each other, because this is a thought, a question, a fear, an investment, both physically, mentally, financially. How can we, leverage our experiences so the whole industry moves forward, that we move the needle together?
Yeah, I think that's great. Susan, can you read my notes from where you're sitting?
No, no. But
One of the things I've written down is I think that is a Euro project. We have talked about it before, but coming together and, like I say, putting competitive advantage to one side and saying there are certain key data fields that everybody needs from every organisation, and how can we link those together?
And that truly is a way of becoming an ecosystem.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a very, very good point, and I've written it down.
Okay.
Thanks. Another question?
Patty from Cultural Chemistry. As an intercultural trainer, I absolutely hear all the arguments in favour of AI, but I would implore the industry to not forget that we are not moving human capital, we are moving people.
Sure.
And all those banks and travel agents and everyone else who decided years ago that it would be great to give everything over to systems, and now when we have a problem, we can't talk to a real person, and we don't ever want that to be the situation with our clients.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think a couple of members of the panel have made the point that we can probably leverage technology to free up time so our people aren't just entering data 3 times, they're spending more time on human interaction. I think that's the point, a better use of time rather than just keying in data multiple times. So yeah, I completely agree. Do we have any other questions? Any other hands up?
I have a suggestion rather than a...
Hello? Oh, okay, I can't really see very well, but okay. We can go back to these questions. I think we still have a few minutes left. Oh, sorry, you were going to ask a question. Sorry, Isabel.
It's all right. AI can do something really, really easily, which is go back to the very beginning of the whole process, and we're here to manage expectations. And I remember one of the very first conferences I learned about something called the is a person expatriable? And till today, I think some people shouldn't be moved around the world because they just don't understand. And then there are escalations, and then we return and we say, this is how, you know, we explained and you explained and we explained, and they just know better. Yeah. And I'm not sure if this is a very quick questionnaire that you can put it out before sending us people.
Yes, Ken.
My sense is that over the course of the years, if you remember, go back maybe 15 years, a really big expat packages, and it was a serious investment for the company, right? Which I think there was a lot of conscious thought being put into who we're going to relocate, cost estimates, paying for education, all the shebang, right? Fast forward 15 years, they're moving. Our clients are moving people on the permanent moves. So the expectation is maybe it's going to be part of your talent development, but as an individual, you're taking a massive risk moving from A to B, right? I'm not saying that clients don't care who they hire, because I think, and we don't know the attrition rates, right? But I agree with you. There's definitely a group of people that should not be moving. But I think focus had shifted. I think the expectations, have become, yes, we will give you an opportunity to move, but you are taking that chance. And this is where the companies many times leave it. That's my opinion.
Okay, great, thank you.
I could maybe add, I think we see a lot of perm moves nowadays, and obviously the principle behind a perm move is that they're agreeing to move permanently, and that might not always be the case in the assignee's mind, shall we say, but I think that has changed a bit of a shift. And when we do get instances, when HR come to you and say this individual's going to be tricky, what they really mean is this person should probably not be moving, but you're going to have them anyway. And those ones are difficult. And do you know what? Sometimes it ends up being a challenging situation between a DSP and the RMC, because you're running around trying to find solutions for something where the problem is not really in the solution or in the market or in the budget. And then you throw on top of that, sometimes you have clients that decide not to flex with those individuals, which I always find quite interesting. And therefore, you have the tight budget, you've got the expectations, and they just create a lot of work. I think there's more that we could do in that space at the front end, working with clients. I think we often don't get heads up with those moves unless the client is really concerned and knows it's going to happen. So I think it's an area that we could focus on a little bit more as a client to give you that heads up when that happens.
Great, thank you.
Just a very quick comment, and I've seen this happen within Alter Global as well. Being able to actually be somewhat compatible with the client is very, very important. We had walked away from a few engagements where we felt that we simply don't fit. We can't be friends, we don't see eye to eye, we won't be able to assist, and we simply just did not pursue.
Right. Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Maybe not. Okay. Okay, in the last 5 minutes, I'll revert back to these. So what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now with your DSP network, firstly to the RMCs? Fiona.
At the moment, not so much a challenge, but certainly 2022 was capacity.
Yep.
Making sure they could cover, it was field consultants predominantly, making sure we had field consultants to cover whatever volume we were throwing, the DSP's way. But it then posed another question about field consultants. Are they employees of the DSP, or is it all freelance consultants? And I would love that, maybe that's something that DSPs take away and look at. Is it feasible in that market? One, because employment law may restrict that, etc. But if it is feasible, is it possible to have some field consultants internally Now, I guess maybe the question is, well, we would only do that if we knew we were going to get a certain volume. But could these people maybe do a dual role? You know, office consultant, field consultant, I don't know, even across immigration, whatever, but just making sure that the staff they have are a little bit more flexible.
Yep.
And they could cover the capacity when it's required.
Okay, yep, great. Thank you. Jason? Anything?
I'll let Danny go
Yeah.
a bit further. From our side, I think the resiliency of a supply chain. So I scratch my head frequently trying to understand what the impact is or will be or could be on our supply chain in a destination service area, especially because of a ripple in the tech sector, for example.
Yep.
We know there were reductions across the sector, across EMEA, with many companies, right? So what used to be a status quo maybe 12 months ago is no longer. So for me, I need to understand what are the threats, what companies are still viable, and just that resiliency piece for me is very critical to be able to go and sell and advocate for our supply chain.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Sorry.
I think for me, one of the biggest challenges at the moment is the economy and inflation over the last year and balancing cost discussions with our DSPs. It's a really difficult and emotive topic. Costs have flown up across the board. You have the client pressure. It's always a question of how do you do it, when can you make increases? There's always, for us, obviously across the board increases on anything within an intensive period is tricky. We have clients that continue to be really focused on costs, where even in a single market, it's a long-winded discussion or it's in contract. So we care about our partners and we care about them having a profit and being profitable. It's important that they actually can deliver good service and don't have to undercut themselves so low that they struggle to deliver the services and then the scores go down. So I think having those discussions at the moment is difficult. There's not always an easy answer, and it's always the discussions in a certain group with a certain client in a certain market.
Yep.
You get that combination together, and it can be very challenging to find a solution at times.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Roman, do you want to add? What's the biggest challenge of working with an RMC?
I think a lot of RMCs are American, just being candid, and I think they're pretty US-centric at times, that's my experience. And I think I'm glad quite a few of them have APAC offices now and so on. And I would kind of inspire you guys to think outside the US. And there's a lot of hot blood here, sitting here with new ideas, thinking out of the box. A lot of new value there to be delivered to your clients. So I think thinking global is the way forward. Thinking broader is the way forward for RMCs. And I think that will benefit the entire relationship across the board between RMCs and DSPs and bring out new talent and add a lot of value for your clients. And that's the topic we're all talking about today.
Great,
so.
yeah, thank you. Marcus?
Well, biggest challenge is not only related to RMCs for us, is right now right staffing. That's the biggest point. We hired last year 16 people, and so we are now almost 40 in Germany, and nobody knows what's coming.
Sure.
So we are hoping for numbers. So let's see. Second challenge is that we compensate now all the cost increases.
Yep.
Inflation, whatever, everything is getting more expensive, and that especially during COVID, many field consultants, external consultants, left the market. They left the industry completely, and we have now someone on board who's just focusing on finding, hiring, or contracting and training consultants. So we are trying to attract people. We founded a relocation academy to attract people to come to the industry and to find people.
Okay, good. Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, I'd probably say three things very quickly. One is to Marcus' point, some help with kind of predicting volumes over the next 18 months would be great.
Yeah.
I think also to Marcus' point, the discussions around cost and price increases are very difficult. And I struggle a little bit to understand when a litre of milk costs me 30% more at my local store, why a discussion with an RMC is as difficult as it is.
Yep.
And then the third one is a slightly unusual one. And it's around the scores that the RMCs award to DSPs and other partners. I think increasingly those scores need to look at more than just the scores that come back from kind of clients. They need to look at kind of company health, company financial health, stability, longevity, and all of
Yeah,
these things
that's
that
a good point.
a little bit get ignored, I think.
Yeah, that's
So,
a really good point.
That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Time's up. I did fly by. First, I'd just like to thank the 6 of you, the panel. Thank you very much for your time.